what you're saying. So there's no black and white when it comes to sexual orientation from a scientific perspective. Of curiosity, and there has to be a degree of humility to that. But there's a fear of the unknown that's around that, especially when you get into the normatives that govern like our society as a whole. Because so let's talk about the history of where this came from and how it became to be an established thing. Yeah. That heteronormative male, woman, one, by the way, which even if you don't go into the biblical side of it, that's not true there either. No. But that was definitely not true. But the whole male, female, one man, one woman concept being the only right way of doing things. Let's go back to where that came from. I think it's really fascinating for us to get into the history of that.
So,
and the profundity of all of
yeah. So when you look over the history of human societies, like you just touched on, the vast majority of human societies were not, monogamous. It should be pointed out that, as far as I know, the vast majority of human relationships were at least serial monogamy, but like societies, no. And it's also important to point out that there were lots and lots and lots of cultures throughout history that had totally different concepts of what sex and gender and sexual orientation even were in the beginning, not just so much like what they could be. And so we had this puritanical culture, this Western European people coming in and colonizing all across the world. We have, in the Victorian era, we have the beginnings of real formal anthropology, really studying what it means to be a human. And you have these anthropologists going out into these, villages, these communities, these different areas all around the world, and they'll go and talk to the men, and they'll say, well, how do you run the village? And the men say, well, actually, she does, and they say, don't be stupid. How do you run the village? Yeah, come on now. And because these are literally Victorian men with literally Victorian ideals. And so these are the people that we're taking our early cues from. And they go in here and they whitewash all these different ideals and all these different ontologies and ideologies and norms. There are plenty of cultures that have 3 genders, that have more than that have all sorts of different orientations. Yes. And we just completely forget about these because those aren't really people. Those aren't really natural. Those aren't really
natural.
Then when we have people like Thomas Hobbes that wrote that all the world was once like America, and he means to say that it was empty because he didn't see the natives as humans, as people. This was just empty land. There was nothing there. And he didn't see that these are vast cultures, huge civilizations, empires here. Nah, that's just wilderness.
They don't count because they're not.
They don't have churches. They don't wear suits. Exactly.
They don't look like us.
Exactly. And so you have this complete erasure of these cultures. And so again, we have to ask, what's more likely? Is it more likely that one culture figured out these deep secrets of humanity and learned everything there ever is to know, and everybody else is just liberals? Yes. All these cultures were just Democrats, is what they were. Does that make sense? Or does it make more sense to say that there's a lot of shit we don't know, and we're still finding things out? And we need to be, again, just listening to these people who are saying, hey, this is how I feel. You wouldn't go up to a cancer patient and say, nah, I studied back in the 1600s. I know how this works. You need to have some blood drained from you. We would say, hey, we know more stuff now. Let's take care of you.
Actually moved and evolved with more information. It's
so fascinating. So when you study, and even there, when you study human anatomy, like there are what we call variations. They're just differences from the textbook. Like I've dissected a lot of people that have like a nerve that goes in a totally different direction than it's supposed to, a muscle that connects a little bit differently, an organ that's shaped, positioned, whatever, a little bit differently than the textbook says it's supposed to be. But these are each human's different, and these are just inconsequential little differences from the textbook. That's why you do dissections in school, to learn that the textbook isn't always right and it doesn't always look that way.
The textbook isn't always right.
No, and so
the information that we receive.
Why is it so hard to say that it's no different when we talk about gender? If I can go in here and say, hey, I know exactly where your heart is, unless that isn't where it is, that happens sometimes. Why can't I go up and say, hey, okay, you're XX. I'm pretty sure you're a female. Let me know if you're not.
Right.
That's totally acceptable.
What's the difference between the two?
There isn't. That's what I'm trying to say, is that there isn't, like, when we say that you're XY and therefore you're a boy and boys do this.
And this is what boys do.
All the time.
And boys are
all the time.
Are always attracted to women. Yes. If not, there's something wrong. Or it's a mental disease. Or it's a mental illness.
Absolutely.
Because that's what I heard growing up. A mental illness.
well, and we'll get back to that, trust me, is that when we talk about these things, when we say that, you're XI and that means you're a boy and this is, not only are we leaving out so much context and so much information with this really rudimentary middle school understanding of biology and how chromosomes work.
That's how dated this is. Fascinating.
Yes, not only are we doing that, but it's cruel. It's really, really evil to say this, because like you said with the mental illness thing, we have people between the ages of 13 to 20 are disproportionately way more likely to commit suicide. They suffer with the problem of existence harder than the rest of us. I thought about it at that time. We all did. And then you have LGBT kids who are several times more likely because they are ostracized, because they are kicked out. Exactly. And people who come from non-accepting households are even more likely. And so when you have this concept of being unnatural, that sinks into the kids. And when you talk about mental illness, you have, idiots like Ben Shapiro online who say, oh, well, this is clear. Look at all these suicides. This shows that this is a mental disorder.
That's how they
all it shows is that these are kids who are being treated like freaks and perverts for just trying to exist.
Like everybody else.
And that is, if I believed in such a thing as sin, that would be one.